The Beatles touching down in New York City 60 years ago.
For more than 6 decades, Sir Paul McCartney has stood as one of the most recognizable musicians in history. From helping revolutionize popular music with the Beatles to building another successful career with Wings, and as a solo artist, his influence stretches across generations. Millions know the songs, the concerts, and the awards. But away from sold-out stadiums and recording studios, there's always been another side to Paul McCartney's life: his role as a father. Unlike many celebrities whose children constantly chase headlines, the McCartney family has taken remarkably different paths. Some embrace creative careers, while deliberately avoiding the spotlight. Others built international reputations completely separate from music. One chose to disappear from public life almost entirely. Together, their stories reveal something unexpected. Despite growing up in one of the world's most famous families, none of Paul McCartney's 5 children followed exactly the path the public expected. Their lives have been shaped by extraordinary privilege, but also by personal tragedy, impossible expectations, and the challenge of creating identities beyond one of the most famous surnames in entertainment history. Paul has often spoken about how becoming a father changes priorities. While audiences saw a global superstar, his children knew someone who wanted family dinners, countryside vacations, and ordinary moments whenever his schedule allowed. That balance between worldwide fame and private family life became one of the greatest challenges he ever faced. The story begins with a daughter who wasn't born McCartney at all, yet became every bit a part of the family. When Paul McCartney married photographer Linda Eastman in 1969, he didn't simply become a husband. He also became a father to Linda's young daughter, Heather. Born in 1962, Heather was a child from Linda's previous marriage to Joseph Melville C. Jr. After Linda and Paul married, he legally adopted Heather, giving her his surname and raising her as his own daughter. It was an important decision that reflected Paul's belief that family is built through love and commitment rather than biology alone. At the time, Beatlemania was reaching its final chapter. The Beatles were approaching their breakup. Media attention surrounded every move Paul made, and his personal life was under intense scrutiny. Yet inside their home, Paul worked hard to create an environment where Heather felt secure despite the chaos surrounding the family. Growing up during the final years of the Beatles meant Heather experienced moments that later became part of music history. Cameras occasionally captured her alongside her parents, but Paul and Linda never encouraged their children to become celebrities simply because of their famous surname. Instead, creativity was treated as something personal rather than performative. Linda's background as an accomplished photographer also influenced Heather from an early age. Their home was filled with artistic projects, music, photography, and crafts rather than the glamorous lifestyle many people imagine celebrity families enjoyed. The McCartneys often preferred spending time on their farm in Scotland, where the children experienced a relatively normal upbringing away from London's constant media attention. As Heather grew older, she developed artistic interests of her own. She studied photography and design before eventually discovering a passion that would define much of her adult life: pottery. Working with clay offered something very different from the entertainment business. It required patience, concentration, and complete focus, qualities that appealed to someone who had spent much of her childhood surrounded by extraordinary public attention. Rather than capitalizing on her connection to one of the world's most famous musicians, Heather deliberately chose a quieter path. Her pottery and handcrafted artwork have been exhibited internationally, earning appreciation based on her own artistic merit rather than her family name. She has consistently avoided interviews and publicity, allowing her work to speak for itself. One of the greatest turning points in Heather's life came in 1998 with the death of Linda McCartney after a battle with breast cancer. The loss devastated the entire family. Linda had been an emotional center of the McCartney household, and her absence left an enormous void. Paul later acknowledged how deeply the tragedy affected all of their children. For Heather, losing her mother meant losing the person who had guided her creative development from childhood. Yet she continued pursuing her artistic career with the same quiet determination that had always characterized her personality. Friends of the family have often described Heather as intensely private, someone who values genuine relationships over public recognition. Today, Heather McCartney remains one of the least publicly known members of the McCartney family. While many celebrity children become regular figures in entertainment news, she has intentionally remained outside that world. Her decision reflects the values Paul and Linda tried to instill in all of their children. That personal fulfillment matters far more than public attention. If Heather chose privacy through visual art, Paul and Linda's first biological daughter would inherit her mother's creative eye in an entirely different way. Mary McCartney was born in August 1969, only months after her parents' wedding. Her arrival coincided with one of the most turbulent periods in Paul's professional life. As the Beatles moved toward their historic breakup, Paul found himself balancing worldwide fame with the responsibilities of raising a young family. Unlike many children of famous musicians, Mary's earliest memories were not centered around glamorous award ceremonies or luxury lifestyles. Instead, she remembers spending time at home, watching her mother develop photographs and learning that creativity often happens quietly, away from audiences. Those experiences left a lasting impression. Linda McCartney had established herself as a respected photographer before marrying Paul, capturing portraits of some of the biggest names in rock music. Rather than treating photography as merely a profession, Linda introduced it to her children as a way of observing the world with patience and curiosity. Mary absorbed those lessons naturally. As she entered adulthood, Mary decided to build a career behind the camera rather than in front of it. Although many expected the daughter of Paul McCartney to pursue music, she found her own voice through photography. Her portraits quickly attracted attention for their warmth and authenticity, leading to work with internationally respected magazines and publications. Over the years, Mary photographed actors, musicians, political figures, and members of the British royal family. Her reputation continued to grow not because of her famous surname, but because editors and clients appreciated her ability to capture honest, relaxed moments that revealed something genuine about her subjects. Even so, Mary's connection to her family's extraordinary history has never disappeared completely. Instead of avoiding it, she has found thoughtful ways to celebrate it while continuing to build an impressive career on her own terms. That balance between honoring family legacy and creating an independent identity will become a defining theme not only for Mary, but for every one of Paul McCartney's children. As Mary's career continued to grow, she gradually became one of Britain's most respected portrait photographers. While her father's name undoubtedly attracted initial curiosity, maintaining a successful career required talent, consistency, and professionalism. Over the years, she photographed some of the world's most recognizable public figures, earning praise for creating images that felt intimate rather than staged. Photography eventually became only one part of Mary's creative journey. Inspired by her lifelong love of food and the values her parents had instilled in her, she also became an accomplished cookbook author. Linda McCartney had long been an advocate for vegetarian cooking, and Mary carried that philosophy into her own work. Her cookbooks introduced readers to approachable plant-based recipes, while emphasizing that healthy food could also be comforting and enjoyable. She later expanded into television, hosting cooking programs that reflected the relaxed atmosphere she had grown up with. Instead of flashy presentations, Mary's style focused on family conversation and simple meals shared around a table. Her father occasionally appeared as a guest, offering viewers a rare glimpse into their genuine father-daughter relationship. Rather than performing for the cameras, the two interacted naturally, reminding audiences that behind Paul's legendary career was an ordinary family dynamic built on affection and mutual respect. Mary also stepped behind the camera in another way when she directed a documentary celebrating the remarkable history of Abbey Road Studios. For millions of music fans, Abbey Road is almost sacred ground, but for Mary it also represented a place deeply connected to her childhood and family history. Through interviews with musicians, producers, engineers, and her own father, she explored not only the studio's cultural significance, but also the memories that had shaped generations of artists. The documentary demonstrated another important characteristic shared by many members of the McCartney family. Rather than relying on nostalgia alone, Mary consistently looked for fresh ways to tell familiar stories. She respected her family's legacy without allowing it to define every aspect of her own identity. While Mary quietly established herself in photography and filmmaking, another McCartney daughter was preparing to challenge an entirely different industry. Born in September 1971, Stella McCartney grew up surrounded by music, art, and travel. During the 1970s, Paul toured extensively with Wings, often bringing his family along whenever possible. The children spent time on tour buses, backstage, and in recording studios, experiences that might have inspired many young people to pursue music. Stella, however, found herself fascinated by something else entirely. From an early age, she loved clothing design. She enjoyed sketching outfits and experimenting with fabrics, long before anyone imagined she might one day become one of the world's leading fashion designers. Paul and Linda encouraged all their children to pursue whatever interested them, whether it involved music or not. That freedom allowed Stella to develop her own creative voice without pressure to continue the family's musical tradition. As a teenager, Stella pursued formal training in fashion. She later enrolled at Central St. Martin's in London, one of the world's most respected fashion schools. Even before graduating, she faced enormous skepticism. Critics questioned whether she was receiving opportunities because of her famous surname rather than her talent. It was a challenge she would encounter repeatedly throughout her career. Instead of responding publicly, Stella concentrated on her work. Her graduation collection attracted significant attention and marked the beginning of a professional journey that would eventually silence many early critics. In 1997, she was appointed creative director of the French fashion house Chloe. At only 26 years old, it was one of the most closely watched appointments in the industry. Many fashion observers doubted she was ready. Within only a few years, those doubts began to disappear. Stella revitalized the brand with modern, feminine designs that appealed to both critics and customers. Sales increased dramatically, and industry professionals began recognizing her for her own creative vision rather than simply as Paul McCartney's daughter. In 2001, Stella took an even greater risk by launching her own fashion label. What made her company different was not only its design philosophy, but also its ethical foundation. Influenced by the values she had learned from Linda, Stella refused to use leather, fur, or exotic animal skins in her collections. At the time, many people considered that decision commercially risky. Luxury fashion had long depended on expensive animal materials, and few believed consumers would embrace sustainable alternatives. Stella disagreed. She believed fashion could be luxurious, innovative, and environmentally responsible at the same time. Years before sustainability became one of the industry's biggest conversations, Stella was already investing in new materials, responsible manufacturing, and environmentally conscious production methods. Over time, many of the world's largest fashion companies began adopting ideas similar to those she had championed for years. Her influence extended far beyond clothing. Stella collaborated with major sportswear companies, designed uniforms for international sporting events, and dressed celebrities for film premieres, award ceremonies, and state occasions. One of her most widely discussed creations came when she designed the evening reception dress worn by Meghan Markle following her wedding ceremony in 2018. The elegant gown received international attention and further cemented Stella's reputation as one of Britain's leading designers. Despite her enormous success, Stella has frequently acknowledged the advantages that came with growing up in a famous family. Rather than denying her privileged upbringing, she has spoken openly about the importance of proving herself through hard work and consistent results. She understands that opportunities may open doors, but lasting success depends on what happens after those doors open. Outside fashion, Stella has remained deeply committed to charitable work, particularly projects supporting environmental conservation, sustainable agriculture, and breast cancer awareness. Many of these causes reflect the values Linda McCartney passionately promoted throughout her own life. While Stella became a global fashion icon and Mary built an acclaimed career behind the camera, Paul McCartney's only son faced a very different challenge. For James McCartney, escaping comparisons with one of history's greatest songwriters was nearly impossible. Born in 1977, James entered a world where music surrounded him every day. Instruments filled the family home. Recording sessions were a normal part of life, and legendary musicians often visited his parents. From the outside, everyone assumed James would naturally become a musician. Those expectations created pressure that few people could fully understand. Unlike his sisters, who pursued careers outside popular music, James found himself drawn toward the very field where comparisons with his father would be unavoidable. Every guitar chord, every melody, and every public performance would inevitably be measured against the extraordinary achievements of Paul McCartney. As a child, however, Music was never presented as an obligation. Paul encouraged his son to explore instruments, simply because making music brought joy. Family jam sessions were common, and creativity remained something to be shared rather than forced. Everything changed when tragedy struck the family in 1998. The death of Linda McCartney affected everyone profoundly, but James has spoken candidly over the years about how difficult that period became for him personally. Like many young adults coping with overwhelming grief, he struggled to find stability. The years following his mother's death were challenging, and he later acknowledged that he experienced periods of personal difficulty while trying to process such an enormous loss. Eventually, James found his way back through music, the same creative outlet that had always been part of his life. Instead of attempting to imitate his father's style, he gradually began writing songs that reflected his own personality, influences, and emotional experiences. It marked the beginning of a long journey toward establishing an identity independent of one of the most famous names in music history. James McCartney's first experiences as a professional musician came through collaboration rather than stepping immediately into the spotlight. He contributed guitar, drums, and songwriting ideas to several of his father's later albums, learning the recording process from the inside. Those opportunities gave him valuable experience, but they also reinforced a difficult reality. No matter what he created, audiences and critics would inevitably compare him to Paul McCartney. Instead of rushing to release commercial hits, James spent years developing his own sound. His music leaned toward introspective lyrics, melodic rock, and acoustic arrangements rather than attempting to recreate the Beatles or Wings. When he eventually released his own recordings, listeners discovered an artist interested in honest songwriting rather than chasing chart success. His debut album introduced a quieter musical identity built around reflection and personal expression. Reviews often acknowledge the obvious family resemblance in his melodic instincts, but they also noted that James was determined to establish himself as an individual artist. Rather than competing with his father's extraordinary legacy, he seemed focused on simply making music that felt authentic to him. In the years that followed, James continued writing, recording, and performing at a measured pace. Unlike many modern artists, he rarely sought constant media attention or social media publicity. Instead, he concentrated on developing his songwriting and performing for audiences who appreciated his music on its own merits. After spending several years largely away from public attention, James returned with new material that reflected greater confidence and maturity. One particularly meaningful collaboration paired him with Sean Ono Lennon, the son of John Lennon. For music fans, the partnership carried symbolic significance. Decades after their fathers had transformed popular music together, their son collaborated on a project built around friendship and creativity rather than nostalgia. The collaboration reminded audiences that while history can never be repeated, it can inspire new generations in unexpected ways. James has continued releasing music while maintaining a deliberately private lifestyle. Interviews remain relatively rare, and when he does speak publicly, he often emphasizes that creating music is something he does because he genuinely loves it, not because anyone expects him to continue the McCartney legacy. His journey has been less about commercial success and more about finding his own artistic voice. While James chose a life connected to music, Paul McCartney's youngest daughter made perhaps the most unexpected decision of all. Born in October 2003, Beatrice McCartney arrived during a very different chapter of Paul's life. By then, he had already spent decades as one of the world's biggest stars. The Beatles had become history, Wings had long since ended, and Paul was entering fatherhood again with far more life experience than he possessed when raising his older children. Beatrice is Paul's daughter with his second wife, Heather Mills. From the beginning, both parents agreed on one important priority: protecting her privacy. Although Paul's marriage to Heather attracted enormous media attention, Beatrice herself was kept almost entirely out of public view. Unlike many celebrity children who grow up constantly photographed by tabloids, she experienced a childhood that was intentionally shielded from excessive publicity. Paul later described how different fatherhood felt the second time around. With fewer professional pressures than during the height of Beatlemania, he enjoyed spending more time on everyday parenting. School runs, homework, family outings, and ordinary routines became moments he openly treasured. Those simple experiences represented something he had often struggled to enjoy during the busiest years of his career. As Beatrice grew older, relatively little information about her personal life became public. That was exactly how her parents intended it. Rather than appearing regularly at entertainment events or seeking public attention, she focused on education and developing her own interests. Over the years, reports suggested she enjoyed literature, creative writing, music, and science. Unlike several of her older siblings, however, she showed no obvious desire to build a public career connected to the entertainment industry. Her decision reflects an interesting contrast within the McCartney family. While Mary, Stella, and James each found careers that involved some degree of public recognition, Beatrice has preferred a far more private existence. Growing up in the digital age, when celebrity children often become public figures from an early age, her quiet lifestyle has become increasingly unusual. That privacy has also allowed her the freedom to decide her own future without constant public expectations. Looking across all 5 of Paul McCartney's children, one thing becomes remarkably clear. Despite sharing one of the most famous surnames in modern history, none of them followed exactly the same path. Heather built a respected career as a visual artist while avoiding celebrity culture almost entirely. Mary established herself as an acclaimed photographer, filmmaker, and cookbook author whose work earned recognition on its own merits. Stella transformed the fashion industry through innovation, sustainability, and business leadership, becoming one of Britain's most influential designers. James embraced music despite the enormous